a political party that was in charge during the worst terrorist attacks in history, who responded with not just a necessary war, but with an unnecessary one on top of that, and then who paid for those wars with tax cuts and IOUs, and then made those wars that much more difficult for our service persons overseas by collecting scads of civilian prisoners, holding them without charges, and then torturing them, and then cutting medical and mental health benefits for our veterans when they returned home. The right sure does point the finger at the left a lot. In fact, the worst thing that the right can blame their progressive counterparts for is for not cleaning the right's mess up quickly enough. Which is a pretty low blow considering what the Republicans have tried to do to hinder the progress of the Democratic majority in the Senate. Their most aggressive tactic is a little technique of Senate procedure called the filibuster. The filibuster is basically a 60% majority vote to end debate in order that a 50% majority can seek to try to pass the motion or law being debated. There's a wonderful old movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where you can watch Jimmy Stewart heroically filibuster around the clock without sleep to right a wrong. And that's exactly what the filibuster is for. It's an emergency stopgap to prevent the majority from running roughshod over the minority. Instead, the neocons are using it in exactly the opposite way, to run roughshod over the majority, to hold Congress hostage, and to blockade every single important piece of business on the table. In the old days, the filibuster was used to bring the majority party back to the table to work out a compromise. But now the right has vowed to stop all progress whatsoever, including measures from their own party, in order to make President Obama look as bad as possible. They've even gone so far as to publicly say, "I hope he fails." They cared very little for the fact that in order for the president to fail, the rest of the country has to fail with him. So they blocked tax reform and campaign finance reform, gun control measures and student loan aid, equal pay for women, and a living wage for the poor, hundreds of critical government and court appointments, jobs bills when millions of Americans are struggling to find work, and then they blockaded emergency spending measures in a time of great crisis, resulting in the government shutting down and our credit rating being downgraded as a nation for the first time in our history. Boy, you know, the Tea Party continually complains the government is bad, and then they proceed to prove it with each and every office they hold. But there was one brief, shining moment when the Democrats broke the stranglehold. When the 111th Congress sat in 2009, the so-called Democratic supermajority of 60 senators, enough to end a filibuster, was not in place because the GOP had fought for 8 months against the election results in Minnesota, which had given a breathtakingly narrow victory to Democrat Al Franken. Then, just 6 weeks after Franken, the 60th left-voting senator, had been allowed to take his seat and serve the constituency that elected him, Democratic Senator Edward Kennedy passed away. Kennedy had shrewdly convinced the governor of Massachusetts to seat a proxy in his stead after he was gone to preserve the Democratic supermajority in the Senate. Unfortunately, his Democratic successor ran a poorly led campaign and allowed a Tea Party Republican to win his seat. Hypocritically, the same neoconservative elements that had prevented Al Franken from taking his seat for a full 6 months demanded that their candidate be seated immediately. So, as of February 2010, the Democratic supermajority was broken, and the most productive Congress since the Great Society of the 1960s was shut down. Yet, in that time, the left achieved almost as much as the next 2 Congresses that would come after them combined. They passed the most legislation since, well, the last time they had a majority in Congress. And they did something that people thought was absolutely impossible. They passed comprehensive health care reform, something that presidents and senators had tried and failed at for a century. And they did it in just 5 months of tireless hard work. And that's the difference between today's conservatives and progressives. Heck, it's the difference between today's conservatives and the conservatives I grew up with. While everyone else is fighting to try to get things done, they are willing to hold America politically hostage rather than doing the job we pay them for. All to make sure that we the people cry uncle and put them back in power. Go do the research and see what the Democrats were able to achieve in just 5 short months. Now, don't you think that they deserve 2 honest years without the stonewalling and obstructionism to do their very best and try to show us what they can accomplish in that time? The selfish, bullying, do-nothing, obstructionist, neoconservative Tea Party sure as heck won't do it. Let's send those deadbeats a message. Let's get them out.